The blizzard came without warning, turning the Montana sky into a wall of white so thick that Olivia Vaughn could barely see his horse's ears as he pushed through the drifts toward his cabin in the mountains outside Republic. It was December of 1881, and he had seen bad winters before, but this storm carried a fury that made even his bones ache with cold. The wind howled like a wounded animal, and ice crystals stung his face despite the bandana pulled high across his nose and mouth. He was nearly home when he saw something dark against the white expanse, a shape that did not belong to the landscape of pine and snow. At first, he thought it might be a fallen tree or perhaps a deer that had succumbed to the cold, but as he drew closer, his heart seized in his chest. It was a woman, huddled against a boulder, her arms wrapped around herself, her clothes inadequate for this kind of weather. Her lips had taken on a bluish tint, and her eyes were barely open, glazed with the kind of exhaustion that came before the final sleep. Olivia did not hesitate. He swung down from his horse and gathered the woman into his arms, feeling how light she was, how her body trembled uncontrollably. She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered too violently for words to form. He wrapped her in his own coat and lifted her onto his horse, climbing up behind her to hold her steady as he urged the animal forward through the storm. His cabin was only a quarter-mile away, but it felt like crossing an entire territory in this weather. When he finally reached the small log structure he called home, Olivia kicked the door open and carried the woman inside. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers, but it was still warmer than outside. He laid her on the rug near the fireplace and quickly built up the flames, adding log after log until the heat began to push back the deadly chill that filled the room. The woman's eyes fluttered open as he removed her wet boots and stockings, then wrapped her feet in warm blankets. Her dress was damp from the snow, and he knew she needed to get out of those wet clothes, but propriety held him back. Instead, he piled every blanket and fur he owned onto her and heated water for tea, adding honey and a splash of whiskey to help warm her from the inside. It was nearly an hour before she could speak without her teeth chattering, and when she did, her voice was soft and carried the refined accent of someone educated back east. "Thank you," she whispered, her hazel eyes meeting his blue ones. "I thought I was going to die out there." "You nearly did," Olivia replied, his voice rough from years of giving orders to cattle and horses more than conversing with people. "What in God's name were you doing out in this storm?" The woman's eyes filled with tears, and she looked away toward the fire. "My husband died 3 weeks ago. Pneumonia. We had only been in Montana for 2 months, trying to start fresh after losing everything in Kansas. When he passed, the landlord in town said I had 3 days to leave the room we were renting. I had nowhere to go, no money, no family. I started walking, thinking maybe I could reach the next town, but the storm came so fast." Olivia felt something tighten in his chest. He knew about loss, about being alone, about the way the world could be cruel to those without means or protection. He had been alone himself for 5 years now, since his parents had died within months of each other and left him this small ranch in the mountains. It was not much, just enough land to run a few dozen head of cattle and grow vegetables in the brief Montana summer, but it was his. "What is your name?" he asked gently. "Josephine Parker," she answered, wiping at her eyes with trembling fingers. "Everyone calls me Josie." "Well, Josie, I am Olivia Vaughn. Most people call me Oliver. You are safe here, and you can stay until the storm passes and you figure out what you want to do next." The storm did not pass for 3 days. During that time, Oliver learned that Josie was 23 years old, the same age as him, and that she had been married for only 8 months before her husband succumbed to illness. She had been a schoolteacher in Kansas before marrying, and she spoke of books and poetry with a passion that surprised him. He had only basic schooling himself, enough to read and write and keep accounts, but he found himself drawn to the way her face lit up when she talked about Shakespeare or Wordsworth. On the second day, when she had recovered enough strength to move around, Josie insisted on helping with the household tasks. Oliver protested at first, but she was determined, and he found that he enjoyed having company. She made bread that was lighter and more flavorful than anything he had managed on his own, and she organized his chaotic collection of supplies with an efficiency that impressed him. In the evenings, they sat by the fire, and she read aloud from the one book he owned, a volume of collected adventure stories that had belonged to his father. It was on the third evening, after the wind had finally died down and the snow had stopped falling, that Josie spoke the words that would change everything between them. They were sitting by the fire as usual, the warm glow casting dancing shadows on the log walls. Oliver had just finished telling her about his plans to expand his herd in the spring, about the valley beyond the ridge that had good grazing land. Josie had listened with genuine interest, asking questions about the cattle and the land that showed she was not just being polite. When he finished, there was a long silence, comfortable but weighted with something unspoken. Finally, Josie turned to look at him, her hazel eyes reflecting the firelight. "Oliver," she said softly, her hands folded in her lap. "I know you said I could stay until I figured out what to do next, but the truth is, I have nowhere to go. I have no money, no prospects, and winter has only just begun. I have been thinking about it constantly, trying to come up with a solution, but I keep coming back to the same question." She paused, taking a deep breath, and Oliver felt his heart begin to beat faster, though he could not have said why. "Can I stay?" Josie whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "Not just for a few days, but longer. I could work for my keep, cook and clean, help with whatever you need. I would not be a burden, I promise. I just need a place to be until spring, until I can find some kind of employment or figure out a way forward." Oliver looked at this woman who had come into his life like the storm itself, unexpected and powerful. He thought about the loneliness of the past 5 years, the silence that filled this cabin most days, the way time seemed to stretch endlessly when there was no one to share it with. He thought about how the past 3 days had felt different, warmer somehow, and not just because of the fire. "As long as you need," he said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside him, a place of certainty he had not felt in a long time. "You can stay as long as you need, Josie. And you do not have to work for your keep. You are a guest, not a servant." Josie's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of relief and gratitude. "Thank you," she breathed. "You have no idea what this means to me. I will not let you regret this kindness." The winter deepened, and Josie settled into life at the cabin with a naturalness that surprised them both. Oliver taught her how to care for the horses, how to milk the cow, and how to split wood, though he would not let her do the heavier work. She taught him things too, not just practical matters like how to make a proper stew or darn socks so they did not chafe, but broader lessons about the world beyond Montana. In the evenings, she would tell him stories about growing up in Boston, about the city streets and the ocean that she had seen only a few times but remembered with crystal clarity. She spoke of her family, a father who had been a clerk and a mother who had taken in sewing to help make ends meet. They had both died of cholera when she was 19, leaving her alone and needing to support herself, which was how she had become a teacher. Oliver, in turn, shared his own history. He told her about his childhood on this very ranch, about his father who had been a cowboy in Texas, before coming north to Montana Territory in search of land of his own. His mother had been the daughter of a shopkeeper in Republic, and their marriage had been a love match, rare in those days when practical considerations usually outweighed romance. They were happy, Oliver said one night, staring into the fire. Even when things were hard, even when we had barely enough to get through the winter, they had each other, and that seemed to be enough. After they died, I wondered if I would ever find that kind of connection with someone. Josie was quiet for a moment, then said softly, "Your husband, did you love him?" She shook her head slowly. "I wanted to. He was kind and he offered me security when I had none. But no, I do not think it was love. It was gratitude, companionship perhaps, but not the kind of deep feeling that makes people want to wake up beside each other every morning for the rest of their lives." "Is that a terrible thing to say?" "No," Oliver replied, meeting her eyes. "It is honest. That matters more than anything." As January gave way to February, something began to shift between them. It was in the small things at first, the way Oliver's hand would linger on Josie's shoulder when he passed her chair, the way she would save the best portions of dinner for him, the way they would catch each other's eyes and smile for no particular reason. The cabin that had once felt spacious now seemed almost too small, charged with an energy neither of them could quite name. One morning, Oliver woke to find that the roof was leaking from melting snow, and water was dripping into the storage room where he kept grain for the animals. He spent the entire day on the roof in freezing temperatures, patching the damage and reinforcing weak spots. By the time he came inside, his hands were nearly numb, and his whole body ached from the cold and exertion. Josie took one look at him and immediately heated water for a bath, a laborious process that involved filling and heating pot after pot. While Oliver soaked in the large tin tub in front of the fire, she made hot coffee and brought him clean clothes. She did not speak much, just moved around him with a quiet competence that made him feel cared for in a way he had not experienced since his mother died. That night, after he had thawed out and they had eaten dinner, Josie did something she had never done before. She reached across the table and took his hand, her fingers soft against his calloused palm. "You could have died up there if you had fallen or gotten too cold," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Please be more careful. I do not know what I would do if something happened to you." Oliver's throat tightened. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers, feeling the rightness of it, the way their hands seemed made to fit together. "I will be careful," he promised. "I have more reason to be now than I have had in a long time." They did not say anything more that night, but they did not let go of each other's hands for a long while, sitting in the firelight with the wind howling outside and the warmth of connection surrounding them. The moment when everything changed came in mid-February, during a brief thaw that turned the snow to slush and filled the air with the smell of wet pine and earth. Oliver had gone out to check on the cattle in the near pasture and returned to find Josie in the kitchen, crying as she kneaded bread dough. He dropped the tools he was carrying and crossed to her in 3 long strides. "Josie, what is wrong? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, wiping at her eyes with the back of her flour-dusted hand, leaving white streaks across her cheeks. "No, I am not hurt. I am just being foolish." "Tell me," he said gently, taking her by the shoulders and turning her to face him. Josie looked up at him, her hazel eyes swimming with tears. "I was thinking about spring, about when the snow melts and the trails open up again. I was thinking about how I will need to leave then, to find work somewhere, maybe go back east. And the thought of leaving here, of leaving you, it just overwhelmed me. I know I have no right to feel this way. I am a widow. You have been nothing but kind to give me shelter, but I cannot help how I feel." Oliver's heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice rough. "Like I have finally found home," she whispered. "Not the cabin, not Montana, but you. Being with you feels like home. I think I am falling in love with you, Oliver, and I know that is impossible and wrong and too soon, but it is true." For a moment, Oliver could not speak. Then he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "It is not too soon," he said fiercely. "It is not wrong. I am falling in love with you too, Josie. I think I started the moment I saw you in the snow and knew I would do anything to save you. These past months, having you here, getting to know you, it has been the happiest time of my life. The thought of you leaving tears me apart." "Then do not let me leave," she said, her hands coming up to cover his. "Ask me to stay, not as a guest, not as someone you sheltered from the storm, but as something more." "Stay," Oliver said, and then he kissed her, a gentle press of lips that quickly deepened into something more passionate, more desperate, as if they were trying to pour all the feelings of the past months into that single moment of connection. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Josie was smiling through her tears. "I will stay," she said, "for as long as you will have me." "Forever then," Oliver replied and kissed her again. The rest of February passed in a blur of happiness and new discoveries. They talked late into every night, learning the details of each other's lives, their hopes and dreams and fears. Oliver told Josie about his desire to make the ranch successful enough to support a family, to build something lasting that could be passed down to children someday. Josie shared her dream of having a home filled with books and learning, where children could grow up with both practical skills and educated minds. They also had to navigate the physical reality of their attraction while maintaining propriety. Oliver was intensely aware of Josie's presence at all times, the way she moved, the sound of her breathing when she slept in the small bedroom while he took the main room. He wanted her with an intensity that sometimes made it hard to think, but he also respected her and wanted to do things properly. In early March, when the first signs of spring began to show in the longer days and slightly warmer temperatures, Oliver made a trip into Republic. The journey took him most of a day on horseback, following trails that were still muddy and treacherous from snowmelt. He had not been to town since before the big storm in December, and he had specific purposes in mind for this visit. His first stop was the general store, where he purchased supplies they would need for the coming months. Then he went to see the minister, a kindly man named Reverend Thompson who had known Oliver's parents and had presided over their funerals. "Oliver Vaughn, as I live and breathe," Reverend Thompson said, shaking his hand warmly. "I had wondered if you survived the winter. It was a harsh one." "It was," Oliver agreed. "But I had help this year. That is actually why I am here. I want to ask you about performing a marriage." The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "A marriage? Well, that is wonderful news. Who is the lucky woman?" Oliver explained the situation as clearly as he could, about finding Josie in the storm, about the months they had spent together, about the love that had grown between them. He was careful to make clear that everything had been proper and respectable, that Josie's reputation was intact. Reverend Thompson listened carefully, nodding. "And this woman, Josephine Parker, she wants to marry you." "I have not asked her yet," Oliver admitted. "I wanted to make sure it could be arranged first. She was married before, only recently widowed. Is there a waiting period required?" "The Bible says nothing about waiting periods for widows to remarry," the Reverend said thoughtfully. "Some people might gossip, might say it is too soon, but what matters is what is in your hearts and before God. If you both want this, and you are of sound mind and legal age, I see no reason why I could not perform the ceremony." "When would you want this to happen?" "As soon as possible," Oliver said. "But I need to ask her first properly. I was thinking perhaps in 2 weeks if she says yes." Would you be willing to come out to the ranch? The trails should be passable by then. For you and your parents' memory, I would ride through a blizzard, the Reverend said warmly. Send word when you are ready and I will come. Oliver's last stop before leaving town was the small shop run by a jeweler who also served as the town's watchmaker and general repairman. In a glass case, among a modest collection of rings and brooches, Oliver found what he was looking for: a simple gold band with a small but beautiful blue stone set in it. That is a sapphire, the jeweler explained. Came from a woman who was selling off her belongings before heading back east. It is good quality, and the gold is solid. I can size it if needed. Oliver did not know Josie's ring size, but he judged as best he could and purchased the ring, along with a plain gold band that could be sized later for himself. The purchase took nearly all the money he had saved over the winter, but he did not hesitate. Some things were worth more than gold. When he returned to the cabin late that evening, Josie ran out to meet him, her face bright with relief. I was so worried, she said, helping him care for the horse. The trails are so bad this time of year. I am fine, he assured her, and I brought supplies. But more importantly, I brought something I need to talk to you about. After they had eaten dinner and settled by the fire, Oliver took Josie's hand and led her to stand facing him. His heart was pounding and his mouth was dry with nervousness, but he knew what he wanted to say. Josie, these past months with you have been the best of my life. You have brought light and warmth to this place, and more than that, you have brought joy to my heart. I know we have not known each other long by some measures, but in other ways, I feel like I have known you forever. You understand me in ways no one else ever has, and I hope I do the same for you. Josie's eyes were already shining with tears, and she squeezed his hand encouragingly. Oliver took a deep breath and continued. I went to town today not just for supplies, but to talk to Reverend Thompson. I wanted to know if he would be willing to perform a marriage ceremony for us, if you would have me. So I am asking you now, Josephine Parker, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, build a life with me, share this ranch and whatever the future holds? I promise to care for you, to protect you, to love you for the rest of my days. He pulled the ring from his pocket and held it up, the sapphire catching the firelight and glowing like a piece of captured sky. Tears were streaming down Josie's face now, but she was smiling broader than he had ever seen. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, Oliver, I will marry you. I love you so much, and I cannot imagine anything I want more than to be your wife. Oliver slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her hand. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with all the love and passion he had been holding back, and she kissed him back just as fiercely, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Josie held up her hand to admire the ring. It is beautiful, she breathed. Oliver, you did not have to spend so much. You are worth everything I have and more, he replied simply, and kissed her again because he could not help himself. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Oliver built a new bed frame for the bedroom, larger and sturdier than the narrow cot that had served Josie until now. He also made improvements to the cabin, adding shelves and storage, fixing a window that had been drafty, doing all the things he had put off for years, because there had seemed no point when he was alone. Josie sewed herself a new dress from fabric that Oliver had purchased in town without telling her. It was a soft blue that matched her ring, and she worked on it in the evenings while he carved decorative details into the bed frame. They talked about their future, about the children they hoped to have, about expanding the ranch and perhaps building a larger house someday. They also talked about more immediate concerns. Josie wanted to continue teaching in some capacity, and they discussed the possibility of her giving lessons to children in the area, though families were spread far apart in this part of Montana. Oliver supported the idea wholeheartedly, loving the way her face lit up when she talked about education. On the appointed day, Reverend Thompson arrived in mid-morning, having made the journey from Republic with a witness, a woman named Clara who served as the church organist and was known for her discretion. Oliver and Josie had prepared the cabin as best they could, filling it with early wildflowers that Josie had found in sheltered spots where the snow had melted. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. They stood before the fireplace, hands clasped, while Reverend Thompson read from his worn Bible and spoke about the sanctity of marriage, about love and commitment, about two people becoming one in the eyes of God. When the moment came for vows, Oliver spoke as clearly and firmly, his eyes never leaving Josie's face. "I, Oliver Vaughn, take you, Josephine Parker, to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, for all the days of my life." Josie's voice shook slightly with emotion, but her words were just as clear. "I, Josephine Parker, take you, Oliver Vaughn, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and cherish you in sickness and in health, in poverty and in wealth, for all the days of my life." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Oliver kissed his bride with a gentleness that belied the depth of feeling behind it. Clara dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and even Reverend Thompson looked moved. They signed the marriage certificate, with Clara and the Reverend serving as witnesses, and then shared a simple meal that Josie had prepared. The Reverend told stories about Oliver's parents, about their early days in Montana, and both he and Clara expressed their sincere wishes for the couple's happiness. After their guests had left, promising to spread word of the marriage in town to forestall any gossip, Oliver and Josie stood on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the mountains. Josie leaned against her husband's side, his arm around her waist, the ring on her finger catching the last rays of light. "Are you happy?" Oliver asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Josie replied, turning to look up at him. "When I was out in that storm, freezing and alone, I thought my life was over. I never imagined that I was actually walking toward my future, toward you, toward this life we are going to build together." "I think about that too," Oliver admitted. "What might have happened if I had taken a different route home, if I had been even a few minutes later? The thought of losing you before I even knew you terrifies me." "But you did not lose me," Josie said firmly, reaching up to touch his face. "You found me, you saved me, and now we have forever to be grateful for it." That night, they shared a bed for the first time as husband and wife, and the tenderness and passion between them was everything they had hoped for. In the darkness, wrapped in each other's arms, they whispered promises and dreams, learning each other in new and intimate ways. The spring of 1882 brought a burst of growth and activity to the ranch. Oliver worked from dawn to dusk, repairing winter damage, preparing fields for planting, and checking on the cattle that had survived the harsh season. To his relief and joy, most of the herd had made it through and several cows had calved, adding to their numbers. Josie threw herself into making the cabin a true home. She planted a garden near the house, coaxing vegetables and herbs from the mountain soil. She organized Oliver's chaotic collection of tools and supplies, making everything more efficient. She also began reaching out to the scattered families in the area, letting it be known that she was available to tutor children in reading, writing, and arithmetic. To their surprise, several families took her up on the offer. Twice a week, children would arrive at the ranch for lessons, and Josie would teach them with a patience and skill that made Oliver's heart swell with pride. She never charged much, usually accepting payment in the form of goods like flour, eggs, or cloth, but it gave her a sense of purpose beyond the domestic sphere, and Oliver could see how it fulfilled something essential in her. By summer, Josie realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when she was certain, she chose a beautiful June evening to tell Oliver. They were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, when she took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "There is a life growing here," she said softly, watching his face. "Our child. You are going to be a father, Oliver." The look of wonder and joy that spread across his face was something Josie would remember for the rest of her life. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so carefully as if she had suddenly become made of glass. "A baby," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Josie asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Oliver replied, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You have given me everything, Josie. A home, a purpose, love, and now a child. I do not know what I did to deserve such blessings, but I will spend every day trying to be worthy of them." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and Josie continued her normal activities well into the fall, only slowing down when her growing belly made certain tasks difficult. Oliver became increasingly protective, insisting on doing any heavy work and worrying constantly about her health. Josie found his concern both touching and occasionally frustrating, but she understood it came from love. In early autumn, they made a trip to Republic to purchase supplies they would need for the baby and to arrange for a midwife to come when the time arrived. The town had grown over the past year, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Several people congratulated them on their marriage and upcoming parenthood, and Oliver beamed with pride whenever anyone mentioned his wife. They also visited Reverend Thompson, who was delighted to hear about the baby and promised to come baptize the child when the time came. As they were leaving the church, they encountered a young couple who looked lost and desperate, standing on the street with all their belongings in a small wagon. Josie immediately recognized the look of desperation in the woman's eyes, the same look she must have had when Oliver found her in the snow. Without hesitation, she approached them and asked if they needed help. The couple, Henry and Margaret Saunders, explained that they had come to Montana hoping to file a land claim, but they had been cheated by a dishonest agent who had taken their money and disappeared. They had no funds left, nowhere to stay, and winter was coming again. Oliver and Josie exchanged a look, a whole conversation passing between them in a moment. Then Oliver nodded and turned to the young couple. "We cannot give you land," he said, "but we can offer you work and shelter. I need help on my ranch, especially with the baby coming. If you are willing to work hard, you can stay in our barn until we can build you a small cabin of your own. We will pay you fairly, and when you have saved enough, you can file your own claim on land adjacent to ours if you want." The relief and gratitude on the couple's faces mirrored what Josie remembered feeling when Oliver had first offered her shelter. They accepted immediately, and the four of them traveled back to the ranch together. True to his word, Oliver put Henry to work immediately, and the young man proved to be a diligent and capable helper. Margaret, once she recovered from the exhaustion of their ordeal, became a good friend to Josie, helping with household tasks and learning from Josie's teaching experience. The presence of other people on the ranch changed the dynamic, but in good ways. There was more laughter, more hands to share the work, and a sense of community that neither Oliver nor Josie had fully realized they were missing. As winter approached again, Oliver and Henry worked together to build a small but sturdy cabin for the Saunders, placing it close enough to the main house for convenience but far enough for privacy. By the time the first serious snows fell, the young couple had moved into their own home, and a genuine friendship had formed between the two families. Josie's time came in late January of 1883, during a cold snap that reminded everyone of the previous winter. Oliver sent Henry riding hard for the midwife while he stayed with Josie, holding her hand and trying not to show his terror. Margaret stayed too, offering comfort and practical help, her calm presence a blessing. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Oliver refused to leave Josie's side, even when the midwife suggested he might want to wait outside. He wiped his wife's forehead with cool cloths, whispered encouragements, and prayed harder than he ever had in his life. Finally, as the sun was setting on the second day, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to anyone within hearing distance. And when the midwife placed him in Josie's arms, both parents burst into tears of joy and relief. "He is perfect," Josie whispered, examining the tiny fingers and toes, the shock of dark hair, the eyes that would eventually turn the same blue as his father's. "Oliver, he is absolutely perfect. Just like his mother," Oliver said, kissing Josie's sweat-dampened forehead. "You were so brave, so strong. I am in awe of you." They named him Thomas after Oliver's father, with the middle name James after Josie's father. Little Thomas Vaughn was welcomed into the world with love and celebration, and even the harsh Montana winter seemed to soften around him. The next few months were a blur of sleepless nights and constant feedings, but also of profound joy. Oliver discovered depths of love he had not known were possible, feeling his heart expand every time his son gripped his finger or fell asleep on his chest. Josie, despite her exhaustion, glowed with happiness, and the cabin was filled with baby sounds and laughter. Henry and Margaret were wonderful neighbors, helping when needed but respecting the new family's privacy. Margaret, who had no children of her own yet, loved to hold Thomas and help care for him, giving Josie much-needed breaks to rest and recover. Spring came again, bringing new life to the ranch. The cattle herd continued to grow, and Oliver's careful management was paying off. He and Henry were able to take on more land for grazing, and they discussed future plans for expansion. Josie gradually returned to teaching, though on a reduced schedule, and she found that she could manage both motherhood and her passion for education with the support of her husband and friends. As Thomas grew from an infant into a curious toddler, the ranch prospered. Oliver built additions to the cabin, expanding it into a real house with separate bedrooms and even a small parlor where Josie could conduct her lessons. They purchased more books, building a modest library that was the envy of families for miles around. In the spring of 1885, Josie gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, with the middle name Rose. The birth was easier than Thomas's had been, and Elizabeth was a calm, peaceful baby who seemed content to observe the world with wide, curious eyes. Thomas, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister and insisted on helping care for her, though his help was sometimes more hindrance than assistance. The Saunders had become an integral part of their lives. Margaret had given birth to a daughter of her own in 1884, and the children grew up together, more like cousins than neighbors. Henry had saved enough to file a claim on adjacent land, and the two families worked together, sharing resources and labor, building something larger than either could have managed alone. Reverend Thompson became a regular visitor, making the journey from Republic several times a year to baptize babies, perform weddings, and occasionally lead Sunday services for the growing community of ranch families in the mountains. He always stayed with Oliver and Josie when he visited, and he delighted in watching their family grow. One evening in the summer of 1887, after the children were asleep and the work of the day was done, Oliver and Josie sat on the porch of their house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Thomas was 4 now, a bright and energetic boy who loved the animals and the land. Elizabeth was 2, sweet and gentle, with her mother's hazel eyes and thoughtful nature. Josie was pregnant again, due in early winter, and they had just learned that Margaret was expecting her second child as well. "Do you ever think about that day?" Josie asked, leaning against Oliver's shoulder. "The day you found me in the snow all the time," Oliver admitted, wrapping his arm around her. "It was the day my real life began. Everything before that was just existing, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, love, a reason to build something lasting. You saved my life," Josie said simply. "Not just my physical life, though you certainly did that. You saved me from despair, from giving up, from a future of loneliness and struggle. You gave me hope, and then you gave me love, and then you gave me this beautiful life we have built together." Oliver turned to look at his wife, seeing the same beautiful woman he had rescued from the storm, but also seeing so much more. He saw the mother who tenderly cared for their children, the teacher who patiently educated the young people of their community, the partner who worked beside him to build their ranch into something substantial, the friend who supported and encouraged him in all things. "I love you, Josie Vaughn," he said, using her married name, which still gave him a thrill even after 5 years. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you, Oliver Vaughn," she replied, tears of happiness shining in her eyes. "You are my shelter from every storm, my home, my heart." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, holding hands the way they had that first night when everything changed. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the Saunders cabin, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called out its evening song. Their third child, another son they named Samuel, was born in December of 1887, completing their family. The birth was swift and uncomplicated, and Samuel proved to be a happy, easygoing baby who fit seamlessly into their busy household. Thomas took his role as oldest sibling seriously, helping to entertain Elizabeth, and as he grew older, teaching both his younger siblings about the ranch and the animals. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys, as all lives do. There were harsh winters and dry summers, cattle lost to disease and crops that failed, but there were also years of abundance and prosperity. Through it all, Oliver and Josie faced everything together, their love growing deeper and stronger with each passing season. They expanded the house again when the children needed more space, adding a second floor with proper bedrooms for each child and a large common area where the family could gather. The library grew to fill an entire room, and Josie's informal school became more structured, with children from as far as 10 miles away coming for lessons. Oliver's ranch became one of the most successful in the region, known for quality cattle and fair dealings. He and Henry became true partners, their combined efforts allowing both families to prosper. Other families settled nearby, drawn by the success and the community spirit, and what had once been isolated wilderness became a thriving rural neighborhood. As the children grew, they each developed their own personalities and interests. Thomas inherited his father's love of the land and his mother's quick mind, and it was clear from an early age that he would take over the ranch someday. Elizabeth was quieter, more scholarly, with a particular love for music and poetry that reminded Oliver of Josie's refined background. Samuel was the adventurous one, always getting into mischief and exploring every corner of the property, but with a kind heart that made it impossible to stay angry with him for long. In the spring of 1895, when Thomas was 12, Elizabeth was 10, and Samuel was 7, the family took a trip to Helena, the largest city in Montana. It was a grand adventure for the children, who had never been farther than Republic, and Oliver and Josie delighted in showing them the wider world beyond their mountain home. In Helena, they visited the new state capitol building, Montana having achieved statehood in 1889, and saw things the children had only read about in books: trains, telegraph offices, hotels with multiple stories, and shops filled with goods from all over the country and the world. Josie took the children to a bookstore where each child was allowed to choose a book of their own, and Oliver took them to see a cattle auction, teaching them about the business side of ranching. On their last evening in Helena, as they sat in the dining room of their hotel eating a meal they had not had to prepare themselves, Josie looked around at her family, her heart full to bursting. Thomas was discussing cattle breeds with his father with surprising sophistication for his age. Elizabeth was reading from her new book of poetry to Samuel, who was actually listening despite his usual restlessness. They were healthy, happy, loved, and loving. "What are you thinking about?" Oliver asked, noticing the expression on his wife's face. "I am thinking about how blessed we are," Josie replied, reaching across the table to take his hand. "I am thinking about that frightened, desperate woman in the snow and how she could never have imagined this life, this family, this happiness. That frightened woman had the courage to survive, to hope, to love again," Oliver said. "She had the strength to whisper those words that changed both our lives forever. 'Can I stay?' you asked, and I said, 'As long as you need.' I am still saying it, Josie. Stay with me as long as you need, which I hope is forever." "Forever sounds perfect," Josie said, tears streaming down her face, though she was smiling. "Forever is exactly how long I need." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growth of their children. Thomas grew into a young man who was the image of his father, tall and strong and capable, with a good head for business and a deep love for the land. At 18, he began taking on more responsibility for the ranch, and Oliver felt pride knowing that what he had built would continue after he was gone. Elizabeth, at 16, had become a beautiful young woman with her mother's grace and intelligence. She had inherited Josie's love of teaching, and she often assisted her mother with the younger students, showing a natural talent for explaining difficult concepts in ways children could understand. She also played the piano that Oliver had bought for her 15th birthday, filling the house with music. Samuel, at 13, was still the wild one, but his adventurous spirit was tempered by a growing sense of responsibility. He loved the horses best of all the animals on the ranch, and had a natural way with them that suggested he might one day breed and train horses for a living. In the summer of 1898, the family gathered with the Saunders and several other neighboring families for a community celebration marking the 17th anniversary of Montana's statehood. There was food and music, games for the children, and stories shared by the adults. As Oliver stood watching the festivities, his arm around Josie's waist, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life they had built. Reverend Thompson, now quite elderly but still making occasional trips to their community, approached them with a smile. "I was just thinking," he said, "about the day I married you too. It was spring of 1882, 17 years ago now. I wondered then if you would make it, two people who barely knew each other brought together by circumstance. but I see now that it was not just circumstance. It was providence, destiny, the hand of God bringing two souls together who were meant to be one. We were lucky, Josie said, smiling up at Oliver. Luck might have brought you together, the Reverend said thoughtfully, but love kept you together. Love and faith and hard work. You have built something remarkable here. Not just a successful ranch, but a family, a community, a legacy of kindness that started when Oliver sheltered a stranger from the storm. As the sun set on that summer evening, casting long shadows across the land they had worked so hard to cultivate, Oliver and Josie stood together as they had so many times before, watching their children play and laugh with their friends. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, the same mountains that had witnessed their beginning, that had sheltered their love through every season. No regrets? Oliver asked softly, a question he asked her sometimes even after all these years. Not a single one, Josie replied, the answer she always gave because it was true. You gave me everything when I had nothing. You gave me shelter from the winter cold, and then you gave me a lifetime of warmth. How could I ever regret that? I love you, Josie Vaughn, Oliver said, kissing the top of her head. Every day I love you more than the day before. And I love you, Oliver Vaughn, she replied, turning in his arms to look up at his face, still handsome despite the lines that time had etched there. You are my home, my heart, my everything. The years that followed brought the changes that time inevitably brings. Thomas married a smart young woman named Catherine from Republic in 1901, and they gave Oliver and Josie their first grandchild, a boy they named Oliver after his grandfather, in 1902. Elizabeth married a teacher from Helena in 1904, a kind man who shared her love of books and learning, and they settled in the city where she could pursue her own teaching career. Samuel, true to his nature, did not marry until he was 25, finally settling down with a spirited young woman who shared his love of horses and adventure. Oliver and Josie gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, turning more responsibility over to Thomas while remaining available for advice and help when needed. They found joy in their grandchildren, of which there were eventually 9, and in the quieter rhythms of their later years. They took walks together every evening, weather permitting, following the familiar trails around their property, remembering the years they had shared, the struggles they had overcome, the love that had sustained them through everything. They still held hands like young lovers, still found ways to make each other laugh, still looked at each other with the same wonder and affection that had characterized their early days together. In the winter of 1915, when Oliver was 57 and Josie was 57 as well, a blizzard struck that reminded everyone of the legendary storm of December 1881. The snow fell thick and fast, the wind howled, and temperatures plummeted. Oliver and Josie sat by their fireplace, warm and safe, surrounded by the home they had built together, and remembered that other storm so many years ago. 34 years, Josie marveled, looking at her wedding ring, which she had never removed in all that time. The sapphire still caught the light beautifully, though her hands were no longer young. Has it really been 34 years since you found me? 34 years since my life truly began, Oliver confirmed, his own hands weathered and calloused from a lifetime of hard work, but still strong, still capable of holding hers with gentleness. If I could go back and live my life again, I would not change a single moment. Well, perhaps I would have kissed you sooner. Josie laughed, the same musical laugh that had captivated him all those years ago. You were being proper and respectful. I loved you for that too. I loved you from the moment I saw you, Oliver said seriously. Half frozen in the snow, fighting to stay alive, You were so brave, so determined. I think I knew even then that you were going to be someone important in my life." "I was terrified," Josie admitted. "Not just of dying, though I certainly was afraid of that. I was terrified of what would come after, of being alone in a harsh world with no resources and no one to care whether I lived or died. And then you came, and you gave me shelter, and you said those words that changed everything. As long as you need. You gave me time, Oliver. You gave me space to heal, to hope, to fall in love. You did not demand anything in return for your kindness." "How could I demand anything?" Oliver asked, cupping her face in his hands the way he had done so many times over the years. "You gave me everything just by being here, by filling this house with your presence, by teaching me what love really means. You saved me just as surely as I saved you that day." They kissed then, softly and sweetly. Two people who had spent more than half their lives together and who loved each other more at 57 than they had at 23. Outside, the storm raged, but inside, there was only warmth and love and the comfortable silence of two souls who understood each other completely. The storm passed, as all storms do, and life continued. Oliver and Josie lived to see their grandchildren grow up, saw some of them marry and start families of their own. The ranch continued to prosper under Thomas's management, and he proved to be an even better rancher than his father, implementing new techniques and technologies while maintaining the core values of hard work and fair dealing that Oliver had instilled in him. Elizabeth became a renowned educator in Helena, eventually becoming the principal of a large school, and she never forgot the lessons her mother had taught her about the importance of education for all children, regardless of their background or means. Samuel established a successful horse breeding operation on land adjacent to the main ranch, and his horses became known throughout Montana for their quality and temperament. In the spring of 1925, Oliver and Josie celebrated their 43rd wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and several great-grandchildren. It was a grand celebration, held at the ranch house that had grown over the years, but still retained the original cabin where their love story had begun. The fireplace where they had sat on so many evenings still held pride of place, and the bedroom where their children had been born was preserved as a reminder of their history. At the celebration, Thomas stood to make a toast, raising his glass high. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Two people who showed us all what love really means. They taught us by example that love is not just passion and romance, though they certainly had that. Love is shelter from the storm, it is patience in difficult times, it is working together toward common goals, it is choosing each other every single day for a lifetime." They built more than a successful ranch. They built a family, a community, a legacy of love that will continue for generations. To Oliver and Josie Vaughn, the best parents anyone could ask for, and the greatest love story I have ever known. The assembled family raised their glasses and cheered, and Oliver and Josie stood together, holding hands as always, tears of joy running down their faces. They looked around at all the people their love had brought into the world, at the life they had built from that desperate moment in a blizzard so many years ago, and they knew that their story was complete. Oliver lived to be 72, passing peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1930, surrounded by his family. His last words were to Josie, telling her he loved her, asking her to stay with him just a little longer, echoing the words he had said when their life together began. Josie, holding his hand, promised she would stay as long as she could, and she kissed him one last time as he drifted away. Josie lived another 5 years, spending them surrounded by the love of her large family. She continued to teach until the end, passing on knowledge and wisdom to yet another generation. She spoke often of Oliver, keeping his memory alive, telling their story to grandchildren and great-grandchildren who never tired of hearing about the cowboy who had sheltered a widow from the winter cold, and the love that had grown from that simple act of kindness. When Josie passed in 1935, at the age of 77, she was buried next to Oliver on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. The entire community turned out for the funeral, and Reverend Thompson's successor spoke of the legacy they had left, not just in land and cattle, but in lives touched, in kindness shown, in love demonstrated through decades of partnership and devotion. On Josie's headstone, beneath her name and dates, Thomas had inscribed the words his mother had told him represented the beginning of their story. She whispered, "Can I stay?" He said, "As long as you need." And so began a love that lasted forever. The ranch continued under Thomas's stewardship and then passed to his children and grandchildren. The house remained in the family, carefully maintained, with the original cabin portion preserved as a historical site. The story of Oliver and Josie Vaughn became legend in that part of Montana, told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the greatest loves begin in the darkest moments, that shelter from a storm can become a lifetime of warmth, that kindness and compassion are never wasted. Their descendants continue to live in Montana, many of them still working the land that Oliver and Josie had cultivated with such care. The values they had instilled, the love they had demonstrated, the community they had helped build, all of it continued long after they were gone, a living testament to the power of love that begins with simple acts of kindness. And on winter nights, when storms swept down from the mountains and snow piled high around the old ranch house, family members would gather by the same fireplace where Oliver and Josie had fallen in love, and they would remember the story of how it all began. They would remember that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, that two people who start with nothing but each other can build an empire of the heart, and that sometimes the most important words anyone can say are simple ones. As long as you need. The story of Oliver and Josie Vaughn was not just a story of the Wild West, of ranching and survival in harsh country. It was a story about what it means to truly love another person, to build a life together through hard work and mutual respect, to create something lasting that extends far beyond two individual lives. It was a story about finding home not in a place but in another person, about the courage it takes to love again after loss, and about the rewards that come from opening one's heart even when it would be safer to keep it closed. Their love story proved that the most extraordinary things can grow from the simplest beginnings, that a cowboy sheltering a widow from the winter cold could lead to a legacy that would last for generations. It showed that saying, "as long as you need," and meaning it, committing fully to another person's well-being before even knowing if love would grow. That kind of selfless generosity could be the foundation for the deepest, most enduring kind of love. In the end, Oliver and Josie Vaughn's story was exactly what they had hoped it would be when they first spoke their vows in that small cabin in the Montana mountains. It was a story of partnership and devotion, of building something lasting together, of loving each other through every season of life. It was a story of shelter becoming home, of strangers becoming soulmates, of two people choosing each other every single day and never regretting that choice. Their story lived on in their descendants, in the land they had worked, in the community they had helped build, and most of all, in the lesson they left behind. That love, when given freely and nurtured carefully, can transform everything. That a moment of kindness in a blizzard can change the course of two lives. creating a love story that would be remembered and cherished long after the winter snows had melted and the storms had passed. And so the story of Oliver and Josie Vaughn, the cowboy and the widow, the love that grew from shelter and need into something eternal and beautiful, came to its perfect conclusion. It was a story complete in itself, with no loose ends, no questions unanswered, no threads left hanging. It was, quite simply, a love story for the ages, born in the Wild West and lasting forever in the hearts of all who heard it.